The clatter of the falling board was a death knell in the cavernous silence of the warehouse. The sound, so trivial in any other context, was a spark in a powder keg, instantly transforming the clandestine meeting into a scene of high alert and imminent violence. The men of the Crimson Shadow, trained soldiers all, reacted with a terrifying speed and efficiency, their quiet gathering exploding into a coordinated search. From our vantage point in the elevated office, Holmes and I were plunged into a sudden, heart-stopping crisis. Our carefully planned infiltration had been compromised. Our position of concealed observation now a precarious, exposed trap. Below us, the floor of the warehouse became a scene of tense, purposeful activity. On the command of Colonel Moran, the men fanned out, their revolvers drawn, their eyes scanning the shadows with a practiced predatory intensity. "So much for the subtlety of Scotland Yard," Holmes whispered, his voice a low, grim murmur in the darkness. There was no trace of panic in his tone, only a cold, analytical assessment of our new and desperate situation. "It seems, Watson, that we must accelerate our departure." My own heart was pounding in my chest, a frantic drumbeat against my ribs. I drew my service revolver, its familiar weight a small comfort in the face of the overwhelming odds. Below us, a dozen armed men were hunting for us, their leader, a man known for his ruthlessness and his skill with a firearm. The prospect of a direct confrontation was not a pleasant one. "What do we do, Holmes?" I whispered, my eyes fixed on the figures moving through the shadows below. "We do what any sensible creature does when its nest is disturbed," he replied, his eyes darting around our small, dusty office, taking in every detail, every potential advantage. "We create a diversion, and then we vanish. Fortunately, I came prepared for just such a contingency." He reached into the pocket of his coat and produced a small glass vial filled with a clear, volatile liquid. It was one of the surprises he had prepared in his laboratory, a chemical concoction of his own devising. "When I give the word, Watson," he said, his voice low and urgent, "you will make for the window at the back of this office. It leads to a narrow ledge that runs along the side of the warehouse. It will be a perilous path, but it is our only one. I will follow you. Do not hesitate, and do not look back." He uncorked the vial, its acrid, pungent odor filling our small space. Below us, the search was growing more systematic, more focused. Two of the men were approaching the staircase that led to our office, their footsteps echoing on the stone floor. "They're coming," I breathed, my grip tightening on my revolver. "Indeed," Holmes said, his voice as calm as if he were discussing the weather. "And we shall give them a reception they will not soon forget." As the first of the men started up the stairs, Holmes acted. With a flick of his wrist, he hurled the vial down onto the main floor of the warehouse. It shattered on the stone, and the effect was instantaneous and dramatic. The liquid erupted in a brilliant, blinding flash of magnesium-white light, followed by a thick, billowing cloud of dense, choking smoke. It was not an explosion in the conventional sense, but a chemical detonation, a disorienting and terrifying spectacle designed to confuse and incapacitate. The men on the floor below cried out in alarm, their vision momentarily seared by the flash, their lungs filling with the acrid smoke. The warehouse was plunged into a state of chaos and confusion. the disciplined search dissolving into a panicked, disoriented scramble. "Now, Watson!" Holmes commanded, his voice cutting through the din. "Go!" I did not hesitate. I scrambled to the window at the back of the office, my heart in my mouth. It was old and grimy, its latch rusted shut. With a surge of adrenaline-fueled strength, I smashed the glass with the butt of my revolver and clambered through the opening. The ledge outside was terrifyingly narrow, no more than a foot wide and slick with the damp river fog. The ground was a dizzying 30 feet below. For a moment, my courage failed me, my body frozen with a primal fear of heights. But the sound of shouting from within the warehouse and the knowledge that Holmes was right behind me spurred me on. I pressed my body flat against the cold, rough brickwork of the warehouse and began to inch my way along the ledge, my fingers searching for any purchase, any crack or crevice that would offer a handhold. A moment later, Holmes was beside me, his movements surprisingly agile and sure-footed for a man of his contemplative habits. He moved with a quiet, focused intensity, his face a mask of grim determination. Below us, the warehouse was a scene of pandemonium. The smoke was beginning to clear, and the men of the Crimson Shadow, their eyes streaming, their lungs burning, were stumbling out into the foggy night, their initial shock turning to a furious, vengeful anger. We were exposed, two silhouetted figures against the dark brick of the warehouse, a perfect target for a man like Colonel Moran. And indeed, he was the first to spot us. He emerged from the main entrance of the warehouse, his face a mask of cold, murderous rage. He raised his revolver, his aim steady, his intention clear. "There they are," he roared, his voice cutting through the foggy night. "Do not let them escape." A shot rang out, the bullet whining past my ear and chipping a shard of brick from the wall just inches from my head. The sound was deafening, the proximity of the shot a chilling reminder of the skill of the man who was hunting us. The game had changed. This was no longer a battle of wits. It was a battle for survival. We were trapped on the side of the building, with a sheer drop below us and a group of armed, angry men closing in. Lestrade and his men, who had been waiting for Holmes's signal, were now caught in a difficult position. The sudden eruption of chaos from the warehouse had taken them by surprise, and they were struggling to establish a perimeter to control the situation. The members of the Crimson Shadow were not common criminals. They were trained soldiers, and they were not about to be taken easily. A chaotic firefight erupted in the narrow, foggy streets around the warehouse, the sharp crack of revolvers echoing through the night. It was a scene of utter confusion, a swirling vortex of smoke, fog, and gunfire. Holmes and I were caught in the middle of it, our precarious perch on the ledge becoming more untenable by the second. Moran, ignoring the police presence, was focused solely on us. He was a hunter, and we were his prey. He fired again, the bullet striking the ledge at my feet, sending a shower of stone fragments into the air. "We have to move, Watson!" Holmes shouted over the din. "To the roof! It is our only chance!" He pointed upwards, towards the dark, sloping slate of the warehouse roof. It seemed an impossible goal, a sheer, vertical climb with no obvious handholds. But to stay on the ledge was to invite certain death. With a desperation born of pure survival instinct, we began to climb. We used every crack in the brickwork, every loose piece of mortar, as a handhold. It was a grueling, terrifying ascent, our fingers raw, our muscles screaming in protest. The men below continued to fire at us, their bullets chipping away at the brickwork around us, a constant deadly rain of lead. But the fog and the darkness were our allies, making us difficult targets. After what seemed like an eternity, we reached the edge of the roof. With a final desperate surge of strength, we hauled ourselves over the edge and onto the cold, slick slates. We lay there for a moment, gasping for breath, our bodies trembling with exhaustion and adrenaline. We were exposed, silhouetted against the faint, ghostly light of the city, but we were out of the immediate line of fire. The battle below was still raging, a chaotic symphony of shouts and gunfire. But we knew we could not stay where we were. Moran was not a man to give up easily. He would find a way to get to us. Holmes, his breathing still ragged, was already scanning our surroundings, his mind working at a furious pace. "The river, Watson," he said, his voice a low, urgent whisper. "It is our only escape route." He pointed to the far side of the roof, where it sloped down towards the dark, swirling waters of the Thames. It was a terrifying prospect, a leap into the unknown, into the cold, dark embrace of the river. But it was better than the alternative. We began to make our way across the treacherous, sloping roof, our feet slipping on the slick, wet slates. The sounds of the battle below seemed to fade, replaced by the roar of the wind and the pounding of our own hearts. As we reached the edge of the roof, we could see the dark, churning water below. It was a fearsome sight, a black, bottomless abyss. But there was no other choice. "On my account, Watson," Holmes said, his voice calm and steady, a beacon of reassurance in the terrifying darkness. 1, 2, 3. We leaped. For a moment, we were suspended in mid-air, two dark figures against the foggy night sky. Then we hit the water. The shock of the cold was like a physical blow, knocking the breath from my lungs. The current was strong, pulling at me, dragging me down into the dark, murky depths. For a moment, I panicked, my limbs flailing, my mind consumed by a primal fear of drowning. But then, a strong hand grabbed my collar and hauled me to the surface. It was Holmes, his face pale but determined in the faint light. "Swim, Watson!" he gasped, his voice choked with river water. "Swim for the shore." We began to swim, our movements clumsy and desperate in the heavy, waterlogged clothes. The current was against us, a powerful, relentless force that seemed determined to pull us out into the open sea. But we were driven by a will to survive that was even stronger. We fought against the current, our muscles burning, our lungs screaming for air. We swam through the dark, foul-tasting water, past the looming, shadowy shapes of moored barges, and the skeletal remains of old piers. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, our feet touched solid ground. We had reached the opposite bank of the river, a muddy, garbage-strewn stretch of shoreline a half-mile downstream from the warehouse. We collapsed onto the muddy bank, exhausted, shivering, and gasping for breath. We were alive, but we were far from safe. We were soaked to the bone, our clothes in tatters, our bodies bruised and battered. We had escaped the immediate danger. but we had left a scene of chaos and violence behind us. We did not know the outcome of the battle at the warehouse, whether Lestrade and his men had succeeded in capturing the Crimson Shadow, or whether Moran had once again slipped through their grasp. But we had what we had come for. We had the location of Lord Vance. We had the key to unraveling Moran's entire conspiracy. As we lay there on the cold, muddy bank of the Thames, the sounds of the city a distant, muffled roar, Holmes turned to me, a grim, triumphant smile on his face. "Well, Watson," he said, his voice a hoarse whisper, "it seems we have survived another of our little adventures. And now, the real work begins. We must get to that chapel. We must rescue Lord Vance. And we must bring Colonel Sebastian Moran to justice once and for all." We had been to the heart of the secret meeting, and we had emerged with the truth. But in doing so, we had declared open war on a man who was as cunning as he was ruthless. The escape was over, but the race against time had just begun. And as we rose to our feet, two bedraggled, shivering figures in the London night, I knew that the final confrontation would be the most dangerous of all.